Still talking about the apostles, and still talking about a couple of apostles that we at least have some information on. We haven't gotten far enough down the list yet to get to the ones that you get a name and that's all you get. We're going to talk about Philip and Nathanael tonight. Philip and Nathanael. So if you'll go to John chapter 1, we get introduced to both of them back to back. And it's in the same time frame when Peter and Andrew first get to know Jesus. Andrew goes home with him, comes back and calls Peter, we found the Messiah. So it's in that same general time frame. In chapter 1, verse 43, it says, the next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. So I wonder how much he knew about Philip prior to this, if they had had any real interactions. We don't know. We meet Philip when he gets called. Verse 44, Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth? Can any good thing come from there? Nathanael asked. Come and see, said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. The old King James says, in whom there is no guile. I like that translation. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. He then added, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So that's our introduction to the two of them. We don't get a great deal more throughout the Gospels or throughout Scripture about the two of them, but we know a little bit, and so we'll take a few minutes to kind of look at those. He mentions that they are from Bethsaida, and on Sunday mornings we're studying from John, and we were just at that place where Jesus fed the 5,000 with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. That happened right around Bethsaida. Philip is in on the conversation that surrounds that particular miracle. So it's kind of an out-of-the-way place, but it's fairly close to Gentile territory, and that kind of feeds into the other thing that we know about him. He's like Andrew. As soon as he knows that he has found what they were looking for, he goes to get somebody else. And so Andrew goes and gets Peter. Philip goes and gets Nathanael and brings him because he's found what he's looking for, and he wants Nathanael to have access to that as well. Look over at chapter 12. John chapter 12, verse 20. Again, Bethsaida is northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee. It's on the eastern side of the Jordan, where the Jordan flows into the Sea of Galilee. And it's fairly near Gentile territory. I think we mentioned Sunday morning that there were a lot of people that seemed to have migrated from Bethsaida to Capernaum at some point in this time frame, because there was a new bathhouse built by the Romans over on that shoreline, and they didn't want to be constantly in contact with all of these Romans who would be coming in for their vacations at the bathhouse. But chapter 12, verse 20, there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. So Philip went to tell Andrew, and then Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. I thought that was pretty interesting. Philip and Andrew, both from Bethsaida, both had a little more common interaction with the Gentiles that lived up in that area. And when the Gentiles want to see Jesus, they ask Philip. And Philip says, well, I know somebody else that would be interested in this. And so he gets Andrew, and he and Andrew go together to talk to Jesus. I don't know if they were hoping that the two of them together could be more influential to get Jesus to talk to these folks, or if it was more just a camaraderie thing that Philip and Andrew were both from a region that had been around Greek-speaking people. I put a little sideline question here that I don't really know the answer to, but how much Greek did Jesus and his disciples speak? When I think about Jesus, I think about Hebrew, actually Aramaic, right? The vernacular that Jesus probably spoke most often would have been Aramaic. But he lived in Nazareth, grew up fairly close to Gentile territory. One of the commentators I was listening to said his dad was a carpenter. Did his dad only do work for Jews that lived in Nazareth? His clientele, the closest clientele, might have been among those Gentiles that were up around the northern and eastern part of the Sea of Galilee. So did he know some Greek? Did Jesus occasionally speak Greek? Now we don't know, other than I think there's 3 different times in the Gospels that we actually get what's called ipsissima verba, the very words. So Jesus is hanging on the cross and he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. And then we get the translation, my God, why have you forsaken me? He has a little girl that he is going to raise from the dead. And he says to the little girl, Talitha cum, little girl, get up. So he's got those Aramaic phrases and then a translation of them in 3 places. But in general, what we have is somebody telling us about Jesus, and they spoke Greek, or they wrote it in Greek when they wrote it down. So the things that Jesus said are recorded in Greek, but that doesn't mean he necessarily said them in Greek when they were first spoken. So we have, kind of an immediate translation of what Jesus was saying, even in the earliest documents of the New Testament. He uses words, at least when the gospel writers are telling about the stories, he uses words like theos, which is Greek for God, and kurios, which is Greek for Lord. They put those words into Jesus' mouth. But did Jesus actually speak those words in that language? Even Andrew and Philip are Greek names. So their parents named them names that were fairly popular among the people that lived in the area, but not necessarily Hebrew names. So it's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Tom?
From a historical standpoint, Greek was the language of the world at that time, and it was the language of trade. So basically all trade was done in Greek. And so I would say that everybody probably spoke a little bit of Greek. And if they were in a type of business, they probably spoke it fairly well, because that's how they conducted business. And then, once again, from historical, the Romans made it safe to travel and to trade. And so the two of them, the commentary I was reading was saying that that was part of the plan. You had a common language now, and then there was safe travel, and that's what allowed Christianity to spread rather quickly in the first century.
Yeah. And whether you agree with it or not, that's one of the arguments for English as a national language in the United States. That the official language is that people should do business in the language of the land in which they live. So people make that argument. Now, we have so many vernaculars in the United States, it would be hard to do. But you're right, the Romans really brought people together by doing that. Jerusalem was their seat of government. It was the capital of Israel. And so there was lots of Greek being spoken in Jerusalem. Don't know on a day-to-day basis how much Jesus and his apostles spoke. Maybe Matthew, who worked for the Romans, he probably was fairly fluent. There was a lot of Greek going on, but When I think Jesus, I think Aramaic.
Yeah,
I just immediately imagine him speaking that.
Sidelight. English is an international language. It's the international language of aviation. If a Russian pilot is flying into China, they're speaking English.
Really?
From pilot to ground control.
Had no idea. A couple of things we do know about Philip. He saw Jesus after his death and after his resurrection. He was present in that list that's together in one place just prior to Pentecost. Right? They name them all out, and then Peter says, we've got to replace Judas because he left us, so now we need to put somebody in his place. Well, Philip's in that list. So he was with them all through the ministry. He was with them through the death, burial, and resurrection sequence. He was still with them at Pentecost. Past that, we just don't see much of Philip. We run into another guy named Philip, who was one of the original deacons at Jerusalem. And so sometimes people get confused there. Look at Acts 21 and verse 7. And again, this is in a section we're covering on Sunday mornings right now. 21:7. We continued our voyage from Tyre and landed at Ptolemais, where we greeted the brothers and sisters and stayed with them for a day. Leaving the next day, we reached Caesarea, and we stayed at the house of Philip the evangelist, one of the 7. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. And so it's the only place that we really run into the young women prophesying. They lived in Philip's house. He was their girls. And while they were visiting there, we have to delineate who we're talking about. They stopped at Philip's house, but you can't just say, we stopped at Philip's house, because people would say, oh, you mean Philip the Apostle. No, we don't mean Philip the Apostle. We mean Philip the evangelist. Now, whether or not Philip the Apostle was also an evangelist, I don't know, but this is one of the original 7. This is the guy who served as a deacon. There's only 2 of those guys that we know really anything about, and that is Stephen, who gets stoned to death, and Philip. And Philip, of course, does a tremendous outreach among a lot of people. But both of them were preachers, both of them were evangelists. But Philip, the apostle, just kind of fades away. You don't see much else of him. Even less so, this other guy, Nathanael. His name means a gift of God, Nathanael. But he's also known by Bartholomew. Anybody want to guess just by the name Bartholomew? I've said it 20 times. The son of somebody, right? He's the son of Ptolemy. And we're not really sure what the name designated. It has to do with furrows. So he may have been a farmer. You may have the son of a farmer, like Peter is referred to as son of Jonah. James and John are sons of Zebedee and sons of thunder. But this may have just been a designation that the rest of the guys around him used, or it could be his last name, that his name was Nathanael, son of Ptolemy. But he's not really well known, other than the things that he says in the very beginning. His immediate response when Philip says, we found him, it's Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And he says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, come to find out, he is from Cana in Galilee. So the first miracle that Jesus performs is at Cana of Galilee. There's that little blurb at the bottom where it says, and his disciples believed in him. So you've got probably Philip and Nathanael, Peter and Andrew, traveling with Jesus at that point, and they go to the wedding, and they're in Nathanael's hometown. He probably knew the bride and groom, probably knew the layout of the town without any problem. He was back at home, and then he sees Jesus do a miracle. So he goes from, can anything good come out of Nazareth, to actually seeing Jesus perform a miracle, and his own faith begins to grow. Now the question is, why would he say something like that? Was Nazareth just such a horrible place to be? There are some guesses. One is that Nazareth was kind of a backwater place, that you really wouldn't expect anybody famous to come from there. There's been a lot of ink spilled on the question of why wasn't Jesus born to somebody important in Jerusalem? It would have been a lot shorter route toward getting in with the leadership and being more effective in the upper echelon. But he comes from a place that's kind of out of the way. It's not highly populated at this point. Right now, if you look at a map, Nazareth is just swallowed up in the metropolitan area. There's just stuff everywhere around there. It's only about 4 miles from Nazareth to Cana. So some people say, well, maybe it's just crosstown rivalry. They didn't play football in those days, but if you're talking about that team that's 4 miles away, you're probably not going to be singing their praises. You're going to be saying, what good thing ever came out of that little town? So for whatever reason, his immediate response is that it can't possibly be the Messiah. He can't possibly be who Philip thinks he is, because the guy's from Nazareth, after all. He's from a nowhere place, so he must be a nobody. But when he meets Jesus, Jesus says, look, there is an Israelite in whom there is no guile, no falsehood. Now, he just got finished saying, has anything good ever come out of Nazareth? And Jesus' response is, he must be telling the truth. This guy wouldn't lie. And he's impressed by it. How do you know me? And Jesus says, well, while you were still sitting under the fig tree, I saw you. And that's enough. That's all it takes for Nathanael to go from, can anything good come out of Nazareth, to, oh, man alive, you must be the Son of God. You must be the Messiah we've been looking for. All of a sudden, he is on board just because Jesus says, I saw you sitting under the fig tree. So how important is the idea that this guy was sitting under a fig tree? Does that have any importance to it? Did a little research on that. And one of the authors said that for a long time, there just weren't a lot of fig trees in the area. And in, I want to say it's in Micah. Yes, it is. I got it. Micah 4:4. Look over at Micah. Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. Old Testament. And verse 4. All of this turning for a verse. 4:4. Micah is talking about the God doing something great for Israel. It's kind of another one of those remnant passages. Things are bad now, but they're going to be better later. Chapter 4, everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken. So everybody's going to, it's like a car in every garage, right? Everybody's going to have their own fig tree. And Nathanael had a fig tree, and he was sitting under it when Philip came to call him. It seems that it had become kind of customary that when you built your house, that you planted a fig tree out front as a symbol of your nationality, your freedom, and that it was a place of contemplation, that they would go out and do their meditating and their praying or whatever out under the fig tree. So perhaps Nathanael was in his devotional time and was out under his fig tree when Jesus says, I saw you. So there's a spiritual connection, even as much as or more than the fact that Jesus just visionarily saw him sitting under the fig tree. So he's impressed, and he's on board very quickly. He declares, Rabbi, that is to say, teacher, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Now, I want you to notice all the mentions of Israel here. You've got, here's an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. And then Nathanael says, you are the King of Israel. Jesus then moves over to a reference to Jacob, who is Israel. His name gets changed to Israel when he wrestles with the angel or wrestles with God. And he says, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Okay? That is as unclouded, unveiled reference to that event as you could get. Right? So Jesus says, not only am I the Son of God, not only am I King of Israel, but I'm the heir apparent to Jacob's family. Right? Jacob went and God blessed him and gave him, this tremendous offspring. And so all of us Israelites are offspring of Jacob. But now that's going to shift, and you're going to see the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So it's my turn to have all the inheritance. It's my turn to be in charge of the family. So you think you've seen something so far, you hadn't seen anything yet. I don't know of a particular time that this was actually physically, specifically, literally fulfilled. Right? That Nathanael was there watching and angels ascended and descended on Jesus. I think Jesus is just saying, understand that someone more important than Jacob, something more important than our identity as Israelites is going on here. So you're an Israelite in whom there is no guile, but there's even more important stuff that's on its way. Tom?
Could he have been symbolically saying that I've received messages from God and I talk to God?
Maybe, but the context with Jacob is not about getting messages. The angels are not communicating with him. They're just there. And then toward dawn, toward the end of the evening, he ends up wrestling with someone that is identified as God. Some translations have angelic, some have God, but his name is changed from Jacob to Israel because of that struggle. So the passage is more about struggling with God, struggling with deity, than it is about receiving any particular message.
I'm talking about Jesus. Is he symbolically saying, I receive messengers or messages from God, and
I guess it's possible that there's an undertone of that. Again, Jesus doesn't get messages. Correct me if I'm wrong. He doesn't get messages via angels. Can somebody think of a time that God needs to tell him something and an angel intervenes?
No.
I don't think so. But yeah, I get what you're saying, that his connectedness to the Father is solid, that he is definitely connected to the Father, as was Jacob, just even more. There is a couple of legends about how these guys died. When Domitian came to power, he is the guy that put John on the Isle of Patmos, somewhere up around 90 AD. Some legends have Philip preaching in Asia Minor at that time, which is the same area where John was, and that he was martyred under the reign of Domitian when he was about 75 years old. Well, if he was only 75 years old at the time of Domitian, he would have been born around 25. He'd have been 5 years old when Jesus was doing his ministry. So that legend just doesn't wash very well. So we're not really sure what happened. If If he was older, I mean, if he was 85 or 90 or something, it might be easier to pick up on that one. But he is, his symbol is a very tall cross, right? So, you've got Peter, whose cross is an X, and Andrew, I'll take that back. Peter's the upside down cross. Andrew has the X cross. And then you have Philip, who has this big, long, tall cross. Again, a lot of that has to do, with all due respect, with marketability. That folks who chose these guys as their saints needed something that was different from the other guys. And so, symbolically, they want to represent them with something that the other guys don't have, right? So it's like modern denominations. When you look at denominational signs, you can tell what kind of group they are, at least several of them, because they have copyrighted imagery on their signage. And so you could say, well, that must be that group that's worshiping there because, the signage looks like that group. And I think early Christians, particularly early Catholic Church, as these stories were unfolding about the deaths of these apostles, some of that was going on, that they were just kind of stamping their mark on some of them. As far as Nathanael is concerned, his is pretty gruesome. We have some traditions that Nathanael was flayed alive in Armenia. Where's Armenia? Is that near Turkey? Have I got the right area? Okay. That he was flayed alive, so they skinned him.
It's more north of Greece.
North of Greece? Okay. The places make more sense because you think about how far the apostles might have traveled in their lives. And, that's not out of the realm of possibility. You could travel fairly well. Again, the Romans did a good job of making travel safer and more accessible, so it may be that he made it that far. And then another group believes that he was tied up in a sack and thrown into the sea. And then another group says he died by crucifixion. So I have no clue whatever happened to Nathanael. And if somebody tells you they know, I don't think they know. But I could be wrong. So again, you get into these situations where people want to know that information. And as a result, they would dig and dig until they could find somebody that would tell them a story. And then they would deify the story, canonize the story, and say, well, this is what happened. But if you go, 3 states over, their canonized, deified story is not the same. So unfortunately, we don't know all we might like to know about Philip and Nathanael. And even more unfortunately, as you continue on our journey, we know less and less about the guys that are farther down the list.
You talking about that story? Time one story goes through 5 different people, it's done changed from here to here.
Absolutely. And again, unfortunately, and especially in the early middle century, say from around 500 to 1500, there was a time frame in there that Christianity was marketable and was used to prop up different economies. And if you could get the Pope to sanction whatever it was you were selling and make it a place that, let's say that in the little town of Camilla, Georgia, there was a relic that was supposed to be the big toe of St. John the Divine. And if you go and see the toe, you get 5 years off of purgatory. Right? And people would just make these journeys to go see the relic. And so relics began to multiply. Very few relics in 500, but by 1500, every other church had a relic to go see. and it was propping up their economies. So it's very unfortunate that these guys who gave their lives for the cause ended up being just monetized and used the way that they were. But anyway, we'll keep digging and see if we can find some accounts that are believable anyway, and if they are, we'll share those with you. Any questions or thoughts about Philip and Bartholomew?